Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Drones. We're really excited to have a great panel to discuss some very interesting new topics for you guys. As you can see, I'm not David. You might be wondering where he is, and we are all too. No, just kidding. He's in Georgia, meeting with some great folks out there, and asked me to fill in for him. My name's Joshua. I'm his brother. I also run a podcast. So today, we're very excited to talk about a new piece of legislation. It is HR 10555. And this piece of legislation is going to be talking about allowing local law enforcement to have the authority to counteract drones as well as to observe them in ways that they currently don't. We're going to go around and just introduce the panelists. Michelle, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Duquette, founder and CEO of 3 Mad Air. Brandon?
Hello, everyone. Brandon Youngblood, co-founder and CEO of Drone Security Services.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Mike Rogers, Vice President of our Public Safety Programs for SkyFire AI.
Thank you, everybody. We're really excited to have you all on here. Michelle, would you mind just introducing us a little bit to the context of this topic and why it's important so we can get a little bit of appreciation before we dive into the language in the bill?
Absolutely. So this is one of those things that is very controversial. It's very sensitive, and people have a lot of opinions. Exactly the kind of thing we should be talking about here. So HR 10555 is considering, again, another way to be able to get counter UAS authorities to state, local, tribal, territorial authorities. This one focuses a little more on state. And the way the language is written, and we kind of all agree on this, it's better. And as they keep submitting more and more, the proposals are getting closer to target. So we wanted to take a minute and kind of go through the language that's in this one. Comes out of New Jersey, right, guys? Yeah?
Correct.
So we'll just take a walk through it. Brandon can give us kind of an overview of what's in it. And hi, DJ. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry for being late.
It's all good. 30 lashes. It's fine. We'll keep it tally.
I'll take it.
But we want to walk through this language, and we want to actually talk about, no kidding, what in here is realistically going to work, what in here is realistically not going to work, and try and get some refinement on where we need to help these folks sharpen the pencil. So, Brandon, I'll kick it over to you. You want to kind of walk us through what the language entails?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. It was a great introduction to kind of what's going on. So this bill was introduced on December 20th, kind of when everything was winding down in New Jersey and New York, unless you're on Reddit right today, and it's still there because Reddit says, it's never gone away. But this came out of District 4 and District 2, Congressman Christopher Smith, and co-sponsor of Congressman was it Jefferson Van Drew. And so it essentially, what it really boils down to is give state state law enforcement counter UAS authorities to conduct that mission. And so what it boils it down to 3 things. It says you are enabled to mitigate if the drone is reasonably believed to create potential for bodily harm to or human loss of life, presents threat to law enforcement, public safety, national security installation, and or critical infrastructure, or have the potential to cause severe economic damage. So think Gatwick or any types of situations like that. So there's a few things I'm going to pull out here. I'm going to try and leave my opinion at the door for this. I only got 30 minutes. I really think DJ and Mike, their opinions matter more than mine on a lot of this stuff because it touches their areas a lot more than mine. So for this, the piece to this that it creates really a tri-federal government coordination process for the state law enforcement agencies to coordinate through, which is Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, so obviously Department of Justice, and then the administrator for the FAA. And so the state law enforcement agencies would really mostly be coordinating through Homeland Security and the AG. or whoever they delegate this down to. And for the FAA, again, it's about aviation safety, making sure that wherever this counter UAS mission is being conducted and the equipment being used can be done in integration with the national airspace. So the unique piece about that is this is the first time I've ever really seen a federal government agency department collaboration effort going on with an outside entity having to go through those three, which can be rather daunting, I think, for that law enforcement level. But I'm sure DJ will address that. A couple other things I just want to point out. This is the first time I've ever seen the FCC mentioned in a law. They've always addressed spectrum in some way, shape, or form, but I think it's a good thing that they finally brought in the FCC and codified it. Well, not codified it because it's a proposed bill, but they do have the FCC in here, which is fantastic to address the whole spectrum issue. The other thing that's a little bit of a nuance in here that I think it can be handled operationally, but it says not later than 24 hours after each mitigation of a UAS. It needs to be reported to Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and the administrator. There are operational means to handle that, and it's a one phone call, which is through what's called the DEN, the Domestic Events Network. So anytime a drone is mitigated, they call the DEN, they report it, and then that reporting is automatically tied to Homeland Security through the TSOC and some other avenues, and the Department of Justice, because most folks are on the DEN. And if you don't have a background of what the DEN is, maybe we should do another podcast on the DEN itself, which was born on 9/11 of 2001 and never hung up. It's a really interesting concept that, is a legacy of September 11th. Again, the coordination process, I kind of already hit on. Ineligibility for participation would be established if the counter UAS mission could not be conducted safely per the FAA's determination. But again, largely, the FAA is able to handle a lot of things that many think they would not otherwise be able to. And then again, there's some mandatory reporting requirements. There's some language nuances in here that I would change. They talk about non-emergency transponder ID. Drones are not, and will never be equipped with a quote unquote a transponder. This would have to go to remote identification, and they need to use the language and point to the correct language in what is now 14 CFR Part 89 within the FAA regulations. There's some rapid response stuff in here. And then the really interesting one too is the Counter UAS Security Grant Program, which they refer to the administrator of the FAA, which is really odd because the FAA doesn't have a law enforcement grant program. They have AIP, which is an airport. I forgot what the I stands for, but it's a grant program for airports to do types of installation, and it's essentially a trust fund that airports can apply to get money to do various things. There are similar stuff on the law enforcement side, but that's all, from what I understand, through DHS and DOJ, and they have different pools of money for that. So that's an interesting thing. I'd love to hear DJ and Mike's your point of view on. And then let me see. And then, of course, there's a review and report on UAS activity. Another thing that was interesting in here is they called out the Department of Defense for the IG to conduct not an investigation or an audit, but really go to the Department of Defense and say, what has actually been the UAS activity over military installations, close proximity. So there is a piece to this where Congress is trying to say, hey, DOD, what is going on in the drone world over our national security and military facilities? So that I know I kind of wrapped up that as fast as possible. We don't have a lot of time. And I think DJ and Mike's thoughts on this are going to be the most critical. So DJ, I'll hand it over to you and see what you have to say.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for the kind words. I sincerely do appreciate it, brother. So I like Michelle said, I think this is a unique approach to this problem by authorizing first and then setting up the criteria for how you deploy and report. So I saw a lot of similarities with our 124N folks that have that authority of the reporting and pushing upstream, when a mitigation happens and things of that nature. So the one piece the last piece you talked about was the funding piece. I'm glad they're talking about the funding piece because that's going to be critical to actually a smooth and actual good rollout, because states don't have a lot of funds to throw at these type of situations. I think we have in the last couple of years, just because it's that knee-jerk reaction of we got to get something done now. Robert Dooley with Florida Highway Patrol, they got a couple trailers. Mike and Brett in New Jersey State Police got a couple trailers to start efforting this issue. Jason out in Texas, same thing. But we need to do this more methodically. And this legislation, I think what it does, at least the way I read it, is it authorizes use, and then there's an application process to deploy. I'm a little unclear how the DTI portion actually folds into that as well, where it comes to me, that's the easiest low-hanging fruit for them to give us now, which is detect, track, identify, because with remote ID rolling out, I think that the legal question around privacy and all that goes away, because if you have to squawk it and give it the information of where you're at, where you're flying, all that stuff, it's decoding becomes less of a legal hurdle in my mind. But I'm not an attorney, I'm not a legislator, so I freely admit that. But the whole instance of actually bringing all those pieces together with a funding piece is going to be huge for us. And the reporting, look, we're doing that anyway. And I think this has a nexus rooted in the fact that the federal government does have more, I guess, how should I say this not to make it sound bad? They have more leverage over states than they do locals. Okay, so there's the reporting avenues are already there from state to state with our Homeland Security Division. So we're already reporting data up through those chains and those logistical channels already with our military bases. So we're already networked into them, whereas maybe a local PD has that, like Hampton has Langley Air Force Base. But I think it just, maybe they're trying to actually get the approach done. I agree, Brandon, this was brought out in December, just before the Congress set. Chris Smith, I think, it was his way of addressing the issue. I think there's another bill out of New Jersey that landed as well. This hasn't been assigned a number yet. But like to Michelle's point, it's good. They're all coalescing around the same solutions. If we can just kind of, maybe, break out our scissors and our tape and maybe start piecing a bunch of all these pieces together. There's good legislation here. We just got to put the right pieces together. But yeah. I'll stop there.
Well, that's why I want to have these conversations. I want to continue having these conversations in hopes that someone with the right ear actually hears what we're talking about. So in this legislation, I'm gonna pull out two things that you talked about. One is the funding. And when Brandon made reference to what's in this legislation, we have not foot stomped this as a problem hard enough yet to put in here that it's the FAA's responsibility to fund these implementations is, in my mind, not realistic. We know right now the FAA is trying to, they have so many balls in the air. They're just trying to focus on maintaining the safety of the NAS, and new things keep getting tossed at them for them to pay for. They don't have the funding unless Congress makes a deliberate effort. It has to be deliberate to ensure that they've got enough budget to be able to slice off for all of these things. That's number one. So leaving it up to the FAA as primary funder for these grants means no grants are probably going to happen. The second thing is, you said reporting. We're doing that anyway. I'll say yes, and because the list in here of who needs to be coordinated with after every incident is fairly long. And I think that there is an inference that there needs to be some, again, being deliberate thought about what kind of data infrastructure is behind this. It's not necessarily going to always be able to be sustained as, okay, we had a mitigation, so somebody go to your desk and write your report and now email it to somebody else. That's okay in the near term, but that is not going to be okay in the future. And when they talk about, where is it, in section 7, definition of relevant committee. So they say that there's 6 reports, and then relevant committees, and then there's another 7 committee definitions of relevant committee. So there's going to be inevitably there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be required to have some essay on how this is working. And that is understandable. But what we're not addressing is the money it's going to take in order to stand up that infrastructure, because it's not like this is freely available. I expect there's going to be some sensitivities around some of this data, and it's not going to be publicly available. So that means there's a security layer that needs to be part of it. I mean, there's all these things that need to happen. That's not accounted for. That's not implementing the system even. That's beyond that. It's what enables it. So until those two things fundamentally get addressed, I don't see that this legislation is going to survive.
So I just want to throw out just a couple of things. I got to run here in a minute. Michelle's hitting on the point that I think all of us have been talking about for quite a while, is that the problem is obviously there. There's a lot of people yelling at the top of their lungs to try and get attention. And there's a lot of proposed legislation, but at the end of the day, you can't implement anything without the funding to do it. And that's how you know when the seriousness of the problem is actually being taken seriously, is when the money starts to flow. And until that appropriations happens, none of this is really going to be, feasible, especially with a lot of the cutbacks that are happening right now. We cannot, this is one of those things where if we don't invest in it, it's going to be more expensive later. And cybersecurity, again, if we're going to repeat ourselves, if we just had invested the money 2 decades ago, we probably wouldn't have been running into a lot of the problems that we have today. And then I just want to touch on one thing, and I know Mike's going to hit this too, and we were just talking about it. And I think one of the reasons why folks keep going to the FAA to be sort of a solver of this issue is because it's an airborne platform. After 9/11, they stood up Homeland Security. All of the security elements that DOT was responsible for, which included TSA, went to after when DHS stood up, and all that security moved to an entirely different department. So the FAA at that point shed all of its responsibility for security because it became solely a safety organization. And that culture was already established, but it's now centered solely on that mission and safety. And so moving things into that security realm into the FAA is counter what DHS was supposed to be, or is, established for, is that security nexus for the United States. Now, with that, the UAS issue is interesting because it's the first time, except for World War II, where we've had to really fundamentally think about a threat coming airborne, and 9/11, obviously. But now we're in this weird situation where it hits so many different offices and departments' equities that we have to get all of these departments on board into an area that touches aviation safety, that touches security, that touches ground security, that touches perimeters, that is lone wolf attacks, that is cheap entry point. We've never dealt with anything like this. And so that's why there's, I think, a lot of jockeying and stuff that goes along. But again, at the end of the day, it goes back to money. You got to free up the cash flow to do this. And I don't think it would take that much cash flow to really hammer this, so long as we are addressing the right questions and trying to resolve a problem. And there is a lead. There is no lead for this. Congress just says, hey, Homeland Security, DOJ, FAA, DOD, DOE, go work together. When has any department in the government ever worked with another department? Ever. It's not designed to work like that because of the different equities and whatnot. So I just want to throw that out there before I had to go. Mike has been deeply involved with this on the federal side too, so it's going to be great to get his background and input on this.
Thanks, Brandon. Are you heading out now?
No, ma'am. I'll hang out for another 5 minutes and then I gotta go.
Okay. So just so that I'm clear, I think this grant program is a great idea. I mean, we need it. My only concern is making the FAA responsible for it. Now, the language says the secretary shall through the administrator, but DOT, they're not flush either. Now, DJ, you've made references in the past to having one decision maker for UAS, counter UAS, and we kind of all joked and called it a UAS czar or whatever. I think this is yet another very good rationale for why that's important. for the reasons that Brandon just shared with us, would you see a future where that, I'm going to have to call it a czar because, now it's in my head, but that office would be the responsible party for a flow of supporting funds from transportation, from Homeland Security, from Department of Defense, DOJ, DOE. They're all wanting to be, they all need to be involved. They all have a role in this at some level. Where this person would be, I say person, office, would be accountable for then distributing the funds necessary that supports these grants, that provides the final reporting. I go down this list. Do you see a world where that's plausible?
So real fast, I just want to throw this in there before DJ answers. It could be a person. It's similar to how, there are different czars within the administration that, kind of directs different things on behalf of the president. It could be. They don't have explicit authority, but they sort of indirectly have authority because whatever they say is really coming from the president, right? So I just want food for thought.
Yeah. So Michelle, I think Brandon, your point as well. See, that's what hit me between the eyes when Brandon was talking a minute ago. So I think there needs to be, and here's why. So right now we have a lot of moving parts trying to solve this problem. Okay. And to Brandon's point, some of these parts don't work well together. And one thing I've seen of the last 7-8 years I've been in this space was the fruits of a briefing are typically from the perspective of the person giving the briefing. Okay, so the FAA briefs a congressman, a congresswoman, senator, whatever. It's a safety briefing. It's a we're concerned about safety, and I totally get that. If you get the DHS briefing, it's about Homeland Security. So the problem we have is if with the limited amount of scope and authority and ability these people have to sit down and talk to people and their staffers do, it's what's going into the pot. It's kind of like herding cats, I guess, with all these different moving parts. If you have that centric point where all the data is coming into, and that briefing can come from a person that's, call it the UAS, counter UAS integration office, or whatever you want to call it, I think you get a better briefing of the whole picture, not the individual pictures. And I don't mean that to shine a negative light on any of our federal partners, because they're all efforting this as hard as they can. I think the nexus behind the FAA grant could go back to where the original money came from on the drone programs, all came from DOT. So DOT funneled out money to start drone programs for reconstruction, all that stuff, to the different various DOT agencies. And I think that's maybe where that language may have came from. But I agree, Michelle, I think there needs to be a centric point where an office focuses on integration of UAS and counter UAS deployment operations, so that they take all the varying pieces and they give one centric point where it goes out, whether it's the grants or whatever. The grants, I will say lastly, are going to be critical to actually making this actually work. But again, there's a fiscal positive impact to the country as well, because for every detect, track, identify system you put in place, you create that common operating picture that advanced air mobility also needs. So there's a benefit that benefits everybody in this space by looking at what the low to mid-level airspace looks like. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, 100% agree. I know that as each agency receives their budgets, their programs are tagged. There's allocation tags. And what I'm uncomfortable with about this language is that it doesn't seem to have a deep enough understanding or consideration of those boundaries, because we're asking, in this case, FAA to foot the bill for something that is very largely security. Mm-hmm. And we're asking security to be responsible for training for something that is highly aviation. So there is, while they recognize the need for coordination, we've got to separate the ops from the funding, because the funding streams have different rules around them. So I like the idea of having, one person or one office that becomes the broker. That's how the FAA had initially started out with the UAS Integration Office, right? It was it was intended to be that objective broker across the other organizations within the agency that had to do things to enable UAS to fly.
Hey, Michelle,
Yeah.
I have to run, so can I just throw a grenade out and then I'm going to leave?
No, not if it's
Nice.
a grenade out.
So
You have to be accountable for your own grenades, Brandon.
oh, you have my number. You know how to get to me. So I just want to throw this out on one thing, and it's kind of a curveball, and it's a wild card. We already have sort of an integrated air surveillance picture. So I'm just talking about surveillance and detection here for a second. That is a partnership between the FAA and the DoD, specifically NORAD, NORDCOM, and actually Canada. And so that it's a shared funded program for surveillance to do this. What I personally believe needs to happen is they need to take in the DoD, this is a policy decision on DoD, this is not law, is that the DoD needs to make the low-level Group 1 and 2 drone issue a air defense mission, not a force protection mission. There's a lot of implications with that. But what that does do is it frees up a lot of money that's earmarked for air defense and air surveillance. And then the DoD, in partnership with the FAA, create a low-level surveillance system across the United States that can detect and do this. That's a monumental task. It's all very expensive, but it's needed. And if that can happen, then that data can be pushed out and shared with DOJ, DHS, and it's just like the normal air picture that we have today that's shared and funded between the FAA and DoD and is a service to DHS and DOJ. Again, monumental, massive investment in probably the 3 comma plus area. But again, if it's that serious of an issue, then that's where it needs to be. And the other thing, it can be tactically implemented around security sensitive sites. It doesn't need to be for the entire United States. You don't need a low-level surveillance system in many places. In Montana, for example, it's trees. So I think there are ways to skin this. It's just about being very creative and possibly leveraging some of the mechanisms that are there today. And then you can, once you have the detection and the awareness piece, then you can start strapping on the mitigation and some of that other stuff. There's my grenade. I gotta go. You guys know how to get to me. Good luck.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. See you later.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
If I could jump on that grenade, if I could.
I might hang out now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a complicated problem. We all know that, but I think this is one of those areas where if we're expecting the government to just magically have a new fund for counter UAS, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Traditionally, OJP and some other DHS grants were the ways a lot of agencies started the drone program. But as of late, we have canine programs and armored vehicles and SWAT programs and drone programs and robot programs and counter UAS programs. And I don't think there is a pool of money that's sitting there waiting to fund these things anymore. So to me, the FAA, Brandon talks about the FAA and the DoD. The DoD thing is an interesting angle. From my conversations, the FAA has no interest in trying to build a low altitude network. None. It's going to have to come from private equities or from state, local governments. And I don't.
You might. Yeah. Can I suggest a different way to say that? Because, I mean, the way you said it just now, I know my FAA colleagues are the little hairs in the back of their neck just stood up. It's not that they wouldn't do it if they could. It's just not economically feasible.
Right, but that's my point. It's not there's no economic interest. I mean, it's not. Yeah, fair enough. It's not like, hey, we don't want to do that. It's that there's no way that the FAA is going to fund a low altitude network like that.
They definitely have an interest in something that is safe because it is the NAS.
Right, but if in this case there was a private public partnership,
which is what UTM is generally intended to be, but that's not addressing this.
Right, but it could. So if you look at offensive drones as first responders. Drones as first responder would be greatly enhanced and benefited by this type of a network, as would counter UAS. So by attacking this, instead of saying we want a counter UAS program and we want a drone program and DFR program, if we say that we want to build a a air awareness network in places that matter, then we can do offensive work. We can do Department of Transportation work. We can deliver medicines. We can do counter UAS. All the infrastructure is there without individual cities trying to build individual networks. It would be like, if there wasn't a high altitude air awareness right now, a radar system with the FAA, we wouldn't ask every community to build their own airport and radar awareness system. So I think the only way, in my opinion, this really scales is if we can find the incentive in private industry to support this effort and to be able to use that stuff dynamically for some of the public safety missions.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as a public safety, because we're not in that market. That's not my market. I'm not saying that as a private industry guy, but even with the FBI, I mean, just to give you some perspective, if I could, being there in the beginning of that program, how the program started and how they decided when to employ it and what systems to use. As Brandon kind of alluded to, it isn't state law that we're breaking to go do this stuff. We're breaking federal law. We're breaking rules on intercepting aircraft and aircraft in flight, interrupting aircraft in flight. We're breaking rules on the RF. We're breaking rules on spoofing GPS with Spectrum. We're breaking rules on intercepting a specific communications in a 2.5, right? So it's essentially a wiretap, a Title III wiretap. So that's why there's all these different agencies that are involved in that. It's a really complex problem to put one system together and say, go out and use this system effectively without interfering with all those other things, cellular communications, 911 communications, air traffic, and all those things. So I'm not defending the fact that this is going slow by any means. It's going slow. But I'm saying that it's a really much more complex problem than the average person really considers when you think about it in that perspective. And so I think funding-wise, I think OJP and those could be the first step in the funding to fund some states and get some states like Virginia and get them up and running. I think these agencies will see very quickly who has their stuff together. And in DJ's case and in Virginia's case, they've been at this a while. So some of these states to start this as a project through an OJP grant or something like that would be a really good place to start. But again, I don't think this becomes an SLT commonplace until we have some kind of partnership out there to build a true air awareness network.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point too about the air awareness network. It's very challenging for a lot of these startups to actually sell these products to like critical infrastructure or to businesses, because there's not like a financial incentive at this point for remote ID detection. Because if a power plant sees the drone flying around, they can't mitigate it. So for them to install radars and things to mitigate that, it just becomes very expensive. And then right now, the only if you're doing remote ID, they can't really track the RF signals because of the wiretapping issues. So there's not that many compliant drones that have remote ID. So if you're going to roll out a remote ID network that tracks that, you're running into the problem is there's not that many people who are actually complying. So it seems like they need to have a lot more enforcement around remote ID, or another way for them to essentially force people to adopt those, those pieces. So that way, when you do have detection, it actually is effective and is usable.
Yeah, that's part of what I think we're all trying to get after, is that industry engagement. What does that mean? And which authorities need to be responsible for which piece? I do want to bring us back to HR 10555. So DJ, I'm going to put you back in the hot seat, my friend. Tell me what you like about this language specifically, so that everyone is clear, everybody out in the ether that may be listening to us, because, we must have a gazillion person following by now.
Yeah.
But then I want to hear what worries you about it.
I definitely like the authorization piece where we create a pathway to authorize SLTT to have it at the state level. So that right there is going to be the first step forward. The funding piece is the other piece. Like I said earlier, I think it's going to it's critical. We're going to have some funding mechanism to help us afford these systems. Now, traditional supply and demand says when people start buying the systems come down in cost. Yeah. As long as that model stays true with the current economic future we're looking at, then we can afford more, cover more, do more, and be more efficient at it. Like I said, I don't think this bill is the that silver bullet we refer to all the time. But I do think there's parts of this one, parts of 1631, there's parts of the NDAA that has been talked about there, I think are meaningful. But I think it has to be this holistic approach. I think we need to detect, track, identify. We need that mitigation piece of some sort to help us be able to do something when it becomes absolutely necessary. Because when it's not, we're stuck with broomsticks and shotguns, and we need to fix that because that's not workable and it's not safety for the homeland overall. I think once we get to that point, if we can get really good at detect, track, identify, if we start these small projects out, and to Mike's part, we build out. It's going to have to start somewhere and build from there. I mean, the problem is we can't get traction to actually start. And if we can't start, we can't do and prove that we can do it. Our 124N folks have proven it can be done safely and amicably with the right checks and balances. The guys at the FBI, Mike Torphy's group and all those, they did it safely. They had no incidents. It can be done. So the next logical movement is to the SLTT, give us the ability to do similar to what 124N does. The reporting piece in there, I did like. It puts enough checks and balances in 10555, I think, to similar to what 124N folks do. 24 hours, notify that you mitigated a drone, if not immediately. Deployment of this technology, coordinate that with the relevant stakeholders. Because if I deploy this technology at the U.S. Capitol or the state capitol in Virginia, and we're anywhere close to Richmond Airport, I need to coordinate that to make sure we don't interfere with glide path and all that stuff. If I deploy it out in Roanoke, Virginia, or somewhere out in Wytheville, there's nothing around, it's a little bit easier to deploy. But I think that pathway's there, and I think it's workable. But I think there's some other parts like the national reporting system, the down select, and some other things that are going to have to be a part of any logical solution, so that we're doing this across the board evenly for everybody. And I think the more that we get into this, there's a lot of agencies that aren't going to want mitigation or the advanced detection. Why? Because that chief or sheriff's not going to be the one listed first on the lawsuit. Okay. So I think you're not going to see as big a outreach as you want, but I think your NYPDs, your LAPDs, your Miami-Dades, your Florida Highway Patrol, us at Virginia State Police, Texas DPS, there are people that can deploy it in a broad spectrum way that's going to prove out the technology.
Do you think that reporting requirement that you were just describing, I want to go back to something Mike said a little bit ago. It's very similar to DFR reporting, where there is a level of SA that certain people need to know that have no role in the tactical. Yet, Army Corps of Engineers, for an example, when there is something that happens and it affects infrastructure, for an example, they need to know about it. So when we have a counter UAS incident and I don't know, something gets blown up, whatever it is, these are people that have relevant SA needs. They have a need to know. And this whole reporting network is just going to continue to get more complicated as we learn, right? Learn by doing. We're learning who all is going to end up being touched by what it is we're doing here. So it makes sense to me that we do kind of what Mike is alluding to, and we look at this holistically. And I don't mean holistically within the UAS and the counter UAS environment. I mean, we look at this holistically. Like, as a nation, we have SA needs for a number of different things. There's reporting infrastructures, several different kinds, all kinds of stovepipes out there. We're going to spend yet more money on creating another one because we have a need. At what point are we able to take a step back and recognize that maybe we need to rethink how we're doing all of this reporting so that we are able to not only save some cash on multiple systems that don't necessarily talk to each other, but also save or bolster the meaningful intelligence that gets shared.
I think it speaks volumes to the whole centric point of there needs to be a central point of the federal government that actually deals with specifically this issue. And to Mike's point, I mean, he's right. the big picture is a win for me is a win for industry. When I can fly further for DFR, delivery companies can fly further also. When a delivery company can fly further, we benefit from that. We're only going to be able to do that. We're only going to be able to do that when we actually quantify the airspace and can deconflict better. And I think it is a precursor to UTM. I think it's exactly what UTM is supposed to be. We're able to deconflict the airspace and put more things in the air. I use that example of 1956. The U.S. Highway Interstate System was signed into law. We did that for a couple reasons. One was congestion and mass proliferation of automobiles on the highway, and for safety concerns. Well, what are we dealing with drones in our airspace now? Mass proliferation of unmanned, uncrewed systems into the airspace. We're concerned about safety, right? Same pain points, same solutions that need to happen. But I think if you can take all those voices and center them into one, critical infrastructure is one that I didn't put a lot of thought into until a couple of years ago, but they have the same needs we do. If the shipyard in Huntington Ingalls and Newport News knows that drone's overhead, they can effectively deal with it. When they don't know it's there, that's the problem. And I have a feeling that we've not seen more that have been there that we didn't see than the couple we've caught here and at Vandenberg and a couple of the other places across the country. So I think everybody wins when we win. If you want advanced air mobility to really take off, excuse the pun, in meaningful ways, I think DTI and counter-UAS technologies, that big foundational piece that gives everybody the next leap forward. And I think having a centric point where all these people come into one area, the reporting comes to one area and disseminates from there, whether it's a UAS office, UAS counter-UAS implementation office, or whatever you want to call it, a czar, whatever the case is, I think we become more, strategic on how we approach this. Well,
I do think that having that kind of single entity would help us with the conflation of these terms. So I know that by saying counter UAS is an enabler for UTM is going to make those people that are on just the drones for good side, drone integration side, really nervous because there is context that they don't have. Everybody's talking about, surveillance, really. Everybody's talking about situational awareness, really. That is a common need across anybody. And when we talk about deconfliction, the security deconfliction is airspace and it's something else also at the same time. You're deconflicting teams that are out there. Some of them have drones, some of them don't have drones. So the Teams Awareness Kit has started to get after that, and they're doing a fantastic job being able to deconflict both airspace for those that are in that node network and the teams, the boots on the ground, from shooting each other, quite frankly, right? Or for being able to find people and get them out of harm's way when they need to. Unless we have a centralized location that understands the definitions of all of these things and the context and nuances to that context, we keep having these conversations where I think the assumptions, because of the lack of knowledge, the lack of depth in that knowledge, prevents people from going towards the middle.
I agree. And I think the better we get at listening to our each individual states, and that's one of the points I tried to make a couple of weeks ago on the Hill, was go back to your home state. If you're a staffer for a senator or congressperson, go back to the home state, talk to your SLT to public safety, because I can promise you the problems are the same when it comes to drones. The solutions are the same. It's just varying differences of what we need. Like Montana may not need everything we need in Northern Virginia, and vice versa. So, to Mike's point, I mean, we've got to bring all the stakeholders, but bring it to one fine point so that whatever briefing happens, when they're looking at legislation, like Chris Smith, this legislation, did he get a couple people briefing, or did he get the whole picture? Which is, this is going to affect everybody. I think we get better legislation when we have all the stakeholders at the table. And to be quite honest with you, again, the SLTT or states as a whole have been the most affected, at least heard in all these conversations. But I think they're more bang for the buck. We're the force multiplier in the homeland. And I can say that selfishly because I work for the Virginia State Police and I'm a state agency, but I really do think it makes the world work better as far as our country's concerned when we can have all of our stakeholders actually at the state level and local level actually working and efforting this problem together. Because, man, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. There's huge gaps right now. Yeah. And we're one bad incident away from legislation being written in blood, and I really would rather stay away from that.
Yeah, that's impressive.
I think the incidents that we've had in New Jersey, certainly there was Colorado a few years back and some others, and what was going on down in Virginia Beach. There's probably never been a better time legislatively in terms of political pressure to say this is the time to probably do this. And to your point, Michelle, that you're right now, the goal of this is to say I want to make the first step of taking the authorities to the state level, and I want to. The money doesn't have to be there at the moment, but right now the first big step is I want authorities pushed so we can start planning for that, for that eventuality and for that thing. One thing I learned working with the FAA really is that you don't come to the FAA and say, give me authority. You come to the FAA with, here's my plan. Here's what I have. Here's my list of things that I've done to mitigate problems and all those things. Then they approve the process. So I think we're getting our stuff together at the state and local level. I think, with guys like in Texas and BJ, and I think if we, DJ, if we are able to present to them, 3 or 4 states that these are the people that are ready to do this as an experimental effort and give that temporary authority to make a run at it, you don't need a massive investment at that point. It's a small investment at that point to prove the point, but it sets us up for maybe this larger opportunity to a larger investment and a larger scaling in the industry for all states to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, sir. The only point I would add on to that is whatever authorities they be pushed down, we got to get away from this 3-4 year blockchain authorities. One of the problems that 124N folks have had is they can't future plan when you don't know if your authority is going to get extended again. So when you start putting money in the pot and investment with people and plans and programs and all that, you got to know that long term you're going to be able to vet these things out and make them work over time, because you can't plan for every 3-year chunk of time. And I think that's one thing that the 124N groups have had issues with is how do we future plan when we're not sure that the authority is going to be reauthorized? Look, they've proven at this point they can do it. Give them the permanent authority. If you want to do that with states for the first round, fine. Do it with the states the first time. We did it with EMT devices for bombs. We had them for 10 years at the state level. And then it was decided at some point we need to actually look at that again. I get that. But we need to put us in a position to be successful so that I'm not, going to my superintendent saying, Colonel, I need this money for this program, but it's only going to be for 3 years, because they're going to be concerned about that investment up front being pretty significant if it is, and then only working for 3 years. And then where do we go from there? So that could be problematic as well. But no, thank you. That's a great point, Mike. I really appreciate those points.
DJs and actually, Mike, also, is there something in this legislation that could be taken out and implemented today, where we don't necessarily need to jump through all of these hoops and have it go into formal law? Is there something in here that if we were to do a deliberate coordination, it could be executed today that would give some level of essay or what have you?
Well, I think, that's something I've been discussing with a lot of the agencies that we're doing the DFR stuff with. You can detect today. You can do things to see what's out there today. There are systems available, and you can get a much better picture of what's over your house, essentially, what's over your community or jurisdiction. You just can't mitigate it. You can't do much about it. And that's
can you identify it?
To some extent,
Can you track it?
You have to be careful. Yeah. I mean, you can passively do these things with radars and that sort of stuff. You're not going to be able to identify individual, tag it as an individual packet, I think. But I think
that's where I'm going. I mean, is there an opportunity to take something out of here and work it right now? Because what I fear is that the mitigation piece, like DJ say, not everybody's going to want it. So and that's the hardest part. So while they're working that, could we at least get after detect, identify, and track?
Yeah, I think, obviously the big fear is the whole mitigation part and what that interferes with. So I think so. I think absolutely. I know that when they first put that system over the capital region, over the downtown DC, the number of and these were all not nefarious. These were just hobbyists or people traveling or tourists the number of drones that were popping up in vicinity of the White House and the National Capitol Mall were just stunning to people. And that's true. I think it brings light on what was happening in New Jersey. No one looks up. We're not biologically, programmed to be looking up for threats. But once you tell someone there's a drone threat above them, everything they see in the sky for the next 60 days is a drone threat coming to kill them. So I think once we put mitigation up, it would open a lot of people's eyes. I'm sorry, not mitigation, we put detection up. It would open a lot of people's eyes to how much is really happening above us on a daily basis. So maybe that gives us the data to take the next step and say, this is what we're seeing around Norfolk, this is what we're seeing around Richmond, the capital, et cetera, or wherever.
Well, I'm just trying to get us to a place where we're not hung up that everybody has to suffer and we can't actually take any action until the mitigation piece is solved, because that's a hard one. We know it's going to take a minute. But so DJ, on the state and local side, and when I say that, I mean SLTT, all of them.
Mhm.
Do you think that there would be an appreciation of being able to detect, identify, and track without the mitigation as a baby step for now? The authorities, the deliberate authorities to do that.
And I think you've already seen that kind of, it's coalesced to that at this point. We realize mitigation is tough. I will say the best place for mitigation right now, and the ACA made a good point of that, is correctional facilities. I mean, not all, but you take your select ones. They're all static environments that do not change. They control the ground. So the kinetic effects of something falling out of the sky and all that stuff, I think you can mitigate that down to very acceptable levels at certain correctional facilities. The only question would be that coordination of airspace above. So that piece, I think, if you want to really truly get it out there and start working it now, that's the first place to start. It's easy. It's low hanging fruit. It's a win for Congress. As far as everything else, I think if I can start seeing it above me and I can get to the pilot, I can educate. And if it has to go beyond education, then I act on that as well. But right now, if I don't know it's there, that was a problem with Langley, to your point about, classifying it. When NASA did the thing with the radar and started looking for lower and slower objects during the case last year, radars are great, but they don't tell you what it is. Yeah. So 18 geese flying overhead can look like 18 drones, and we don't want to raise the threat level there. But I can tell you in downtown Richmond, Mike, to your point, 250 to 300 drones a week in a 9-mile bubble, and that sensor has been up since 2022. And that's a number we tried to reproduce all over the state with that D-drone project we did by moving that trailer all over Virginia. And crazy enough, the busiest place in Virginia was Roanoke. I would have never thought that, but we have more drones in Roanoke than anywhere else in the state. Now, other than downtown Richmond, I mean, your dense urban environments. But yeah, Virginia Beach didn't have as many drones as they have in Roanoke in the valley there. It was crazy. The last POTUS visit before the election, we were running our D-drone trailer and a bunch of other detection equipment to support that operation. Crazy amount of drones. Country people like drones, apparently. But to your point, Michelle, I honestly do think DTI or DTC, whatever you want to call it, that's a low-hanging fruit today. I would love to see a legal opinion on the remote ID and decoding. Is that still an issue? So now that you have to squawk it, is it can we carve out that Title 18 issue? I've done wiretaps for 27 years as a technical surveillance agent. I see the parallel for the breaking in, but I don't see the parallel for the whole issue. Can we do that now? Since remote ID, you have to tell me what you are, where you are, and what you're doing. That's a legal opinion I'd love to see come out of the AG's office or somebody to give us that legal opinion.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. And I think that's where the challenge is with a lot of the detection, because the least expensive detection is the one that detects the radio frequency, right? But that's the one that runs into that wiretapping issue. So unless the drone's compliant with the road ID, which most people who are breaking the law won't be, right? You're going to have a very tough time legally being able to do anything, even if you do detect it, because if you're not detecting it with the remote ID, then it can be challenging if to process or even go after that person using that radio frequency. But Mike, maybe you could speak a little bit to that. Right now, isn't it pretty much the only detection options for drones beyond the wiretapping issue is just remote ID, and then you have like radar and visual line of sight? Are there any other detection methods that can be used that are maybe less expensive than radar that be effective, or do those start running into the issue with remote or the wiretapping?
Well, and generally speaking, my familiarity with it is it's going to be RF, or it's going to be cameras, or it's going to be radar. Those are the three primary ways we're going. The frequency of the drone, seeing it visually, or seeing it with the radar. I don't know if DJ could add to that, but The issue is when you have a particular drone and you want to target that drone for some kind of mitigation, then you are essentially conducting a wiretap in their opinions. It's under the Communications Act, you're going after a specific frequency in that 2.5 range or whatever range it's in. So it starts falling into that weird Title III area. I agree. It's since the day that we were told that, in 2015, that it seemed insane to us a little bit, back then. So I agree with DJ that maybe that's a really good first carve out is can we separate the Title III stuff from an airborne target that's supposed to be, that's the thing. It's either broadcasting or it's supposed to be broadcasting.
Yeah.
Right. One of those two. So if it is broadcasting, it's a voluntarily emitting its signal. If it's not broadcasting, it's violating another rule. So that might be an easy carve out.
Yeah, and if I can narrow the haystack instead of looking at 30 drones and look at just 3, that makes my job a little easier and helps me on the security level as well.
Well, guys, as much as I would love to solve world peace in an hour, we are coming to a close here. I do think that there are some good takeaways here. I'm not going to say that 105.55 is not good. There is some goodness in here. The intent is good. I think the devil is in the details. Those nuances that impact the context behind what makes these things actually real is where we don't spend enough time. And I'm not sure the folks that wrote this had enough visibility to get into those nuances, to get why some of these things just aren't going to be able to happen in the real world. But I mean, for those folks that are listening that are connected to that world, please don't stop now. We're getting better and better and better as these pieces of legislation are being drafted. So please keep doing that.
Amen.
And like DJ foot stomped earlier, and he has been right along with every conference that we're in, go talk to your local folks. See the world through their lens. Let them share with you what seems they're touching and how it complicates or helps their mission. Because only then are you going to be able to write something that's meaningful for them. So this is a great start. I'm encouraging everybody, keep at it, and just call DJ. That's the end.
I'm just glad to be part of the conversation. I really am. I want to shore up this hole in our homeland security, man, and make safe communities. I really do. It's scary as to what this technology is capable of now.
And it's only going to get more complex and scarier. So we've got to get after it now. Well, Josh,
right.
I think we're at time.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and make sure to tune in next week. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Take care, everybody.